have some of our wonderful members and other guests on with us. And I want to welcome everybody who's here for joining us today. We are here to talk about Meshilut. And in order to give us this is a resumption of Americans for a Safe Israel's, also known as AFSI's, a series of Zoom meetings to get you informed about what is really, really happening in Israel. And with us today, to start off, we have the managing director of Meshilut, which is the movement for governability and democracy in Israel. And his name is Dan Seaman. And thank you, Dan, for making yourself available. I know it was very difficult for making yourself available to be here with us, but please introduce yourself and take it away.
Okay, well, first off, thank you very much for arranging this, and thanks for everybody for joining us today, and for AFSI, as we say in Hebrew, Bechlal, in general, for being supportive of the state of Israel. For so many years, I've known of the organization for many, many years, and always been strongly supportive, and it's something we don't take for granted anymore, I guess, but to stay so strongly supportive of Israel is very important. My background is, some of you may know me, I saw some of the names I'm familiar with. I worked for 30 years with the government in Israel, Foreign Ministry, IDF spokesman, but mostly in the Prime Minister's office under several different Prime Ministers, including my Prime Minister Netanyahu. I was the director of the government press office for 10 years, beginning of the Oslo War up until 2010. My entire career was fighting for the state of Israel over its image with the media, hasbara, as many people call it, public diplomacy. I retired in 2013 as the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Public Diplomacy. And in the years since then, continued working with different, sometimes with the media, different things that helped with the image of the state of Israel. I always found that the important battle, and using my abilities for the benefit of the state of Israel. And about a year ago, I was approached by Simcha. Now, we mentioned this, Asi, I can say that you're for a safe Israel. I don't think that in our entire history, certainly of the state of Israel, but in the history of the Jewish people, have we ever been in a more secure and safer situation than we are today. And this generation is benefiting not only from the independent state of Israel, but also a very strong Israel. And a lot of it can be attributed to the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, for everything that he's done. Next week, you'll be celebrating in the United States with us the signing of another peace agreement, which is a fundamental change in the direction of what's going on, changing perceptions and things that have been going on here that were very wrong for a very long time, and proving that things can be done successfully very differently, and coming towards the Arab countries from a position not only of strength, but of unity, meaning that they find us as partners. And this is a fundamental change, also shifting. As I said, I've worked all these years for Israel's image and Israel's position in the world. If we ended the wars against Israel, ended long ago, there's no real direct threat to Israel, except for Iran in this case. The only problems we had to deal with in the past 20 years has been diplomacy, and the effort basically of Europeans and the UN to undermine the stability and the legitimacy of the state of Israel. And we're fighting that right now with change in this whole perception that Israel can be accepted as a full partner. Nobody's doing us any favors. In fact, we're doing favors to a lot of the countries around here. And it's not only in the Middle East, it's also with the Mediterranean-based countries. So there's a fundamental shift going on, and Israel is becoming even stronger and more independent. The alliance with the United States is now based on the fact that we are serving American interests, And there's a very good, strong bond between the United States and Israel today. So all this going on, when I was approached by Simcha, he's dealing with what for many Israelis is the real threat that we are facing at the moment. As I said, we no longer have external threats and existential threats to the state of Israel. It seems that we can't take anything here and just enjoy what we achieve. We always have to find some kind of problem. And for quite a while, many Israelis have been feeling that the real threat to the stability of the state of Israel, to the future of the state of Israel, is actually internal, with the attempt to undermine the stability of the government and the shift going on with the, which many Americans understand, that you have to have a balance of powers between the three branches of government. Here for 35 years, there's been a very subtle and slow encroachment on the legitimacy of the government, while the judicial has been taking over more and more powers. And Simcha approached me with this and offered, and I said, you know what, there are a lot of pro-Israeli groups, a lot of Hasbara organizations, a lot of very good people involved and doing good work. I can now shift over and go into and use my abilities and try to move this very small organization of 2-3 people and try to turn it into something that, and the goals of Meshilut is first and foremost informing the Israeli public. A lot of Israelis understood that we're facing huge problems here, but they couldn't really figure out what's going on. And Simcha has this unique ability that you'll witness very soon of explaining things, especially judicial issues, which I admit, even myself, that sometimes it's overwhelming. You're not really clear on what's going on. You in the United States are facing a lot of this right now in the past year with the attempt to undermine the legitimacy of the American presidency, things that always seem to be done to Republican presidents. We've been going through this for a very long time. And people don't really understand because they put their trust in the system. They put their trust in the judges and the judiciary. You know, who would believe that these people are capable of taking advantage of the system or not being truthful and honest? And Simcha has a very good way of explaining this in simple terms that the Israeli public can understand it and understand how they're being affected. And this is what Meshilut does, is bring it first off to the public, the general public, to let them know how their rights as voters in this country and how their representatives are being affected by this encroachment. And the second thing is helping the representatives understand and help them with the being a lawyer. And we have a few lawyers working with us to set up legislation to help strengthen their positions vis-a-vis the judiciary in Israel. So this is the background, and this is what we're dealing with right now. And this has become a major issue. Those of you following the internal debate in Israel right now, especially in the past few days, but it seems that every few weeks we have another core of attention around this same issue, the attempt to undermine the legitimacy of both the executive branch and the elected officials in Israel. And our role here is to help them through creating legislation, understanding the issues, and informing and educating the public here to understand what their rights are and to fight against this and to benefit the state of Israel.
Thanks so much, Dan. That was a great introduction. And I know that Simcha is just champing at the bit to take it from there.
Wait, what's that? Hold on. What are you doing?
It's FC. I didn't realize it's speed up.
I'm sorry.
I'm
Simcha,
here.
can you just take us back a few years and explain how Israel found itself with this tremendous imbalance of power?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for being here. It really,
Thank you
it's
for
really an
inviting.
honor. It's really an honor.
Okay, so my answer to that, in order to get the answer today, I hope we'll sometime in the near future we'll have the ability to translate the book to English. But you'll need to learn Hebrew and to read my book that I published that his name is, if I translate it to English, is the ruling party of Bagatz, how Israel became a legalocracy. In the book, I try to explain to the Israeli public that I have to say, some people say, "Oh, we're not in Israel. We support Israel. We love Israel, but we don't really get it. We don't really understand." So you are in a good place. No one understands. Even in Israel, it's not unique to people in the U.S. or some other countries not to understand what's going on in Israeli judiciary and what happened and how it all began. Most people in Israel don't know it; they feel it. They understand it. I think the last election was partly on that issue. I am sure the next election we might have it in sooner than later will be on that issue. But even people in Israel, even people that are involved in politics, as Danny said, involved in politics, involved in media, did not understand, did not have a clue how it started. So let's start. And it's not a few years back. I cannot start. I can have when we started Meshilut. I will say that when we started Meshilut 8 years ago, it was me and my friend Yuda Amrani. We started the organization, and we wrote a few papers, what we want to achieve, what we want to do, what is the problem that we see for the uninformed public. But whenever we met with someone who is involved, someone who knows what's going on in Israeli justice system, or with politicians, we would only have to say one sentence. People would say, what does Meshilut does? What does the movement for governability and democracy, what is your aim? What do you want to achieve? So I can tell you the long story, but the short story is, we want to take everything Aaron Barak did and undo it. That's what I would say to anyone, and they would say, oh, what a great thing to do. And they would immediately understand what we're doing, and they would immediately say, we want to help. That one sentence, we want to take whatever Aaron Barak did and undo it. Now let's say what Aaron Barak did. Let's first say, who is Aaron Barak? Aaron Barak was the Chief Justice in Israel. I have to say, when I talk to people, some say, what do you want from this old guy? He already moved out of the Supreme Court in 2005, 2006. What do you want from him? Why do you still talk about him? We are now in 2020, but we are now in 2020, and everything that happens in Israel, in the judiciary, or in the legal advisory, is within Aaron Barak image. Everything you can imagine. Let's talk about it. But before he was the Chief Justice, he was a Supreme Court Justice. And before he was a Supreme Court Justice, he was the legal advisor. He started in 76. But he didn't even start there. Before he was working for the government or working for his own agenda as a justice or for the government, before he did that, he was a law professor in the Hebrew U, and he had his group. And the group, I'm not making it up. You can check it all. Everything is 100%. You can have one of the people sit on Google and do fact check on me. If you will prove me wrong, I will pay. I'm willing to pay. If one fact that I'm saying is not 100% correct, but sometimes people don't believe me because the truth is unbelievable. They call themselves the group of young law professors in Hebrew U in the 50s. They call themselves the Young Turks. I don't know who knows what the Young Turks is, but the Young Turks are the revolutionist party in the Ottoman Empire, who is the beginners of modern Turkey that wanted to make a revolution. It was not such a nice revolution, but a revolution. They wanted to change the way law is being taught in Israel. They want to change the way that law is being adjudicated in Israel. They said, we want to change it all. We want to put values, namely our values, in the law. Now, this group became later, most of them were Supreme Court justices, law professors, and they shaped the Israeli academia. Should have been the legal academia. They changed it in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. They changed the legal advisory in the 70s, and they changed the court since the 80s. What was the change? The change was that Israel used to have a system like in the UK, like in Britain. I'm talking to people in the US, so they say, oh, we have 3 branches of government. We have a constitution, a written constitution, and the branches need to safeguard each other. We need the judiciary to check whatever the parliament said according to the constitution. We need that. Most people will say that. I also myself, I learned constitutional law in Northwestern University in Chicago. That's the way it's being taught. Okay, Israel is a different system. Used to be a different system. We were with the UK, the parliamentarian system. We don't have a separate branch, such a separation of branches in the election like you have in the US. But the rule in the UK is that whatever the parliament decides, that's the final word. You don't have any check on the legislation power of the parliament, and that was our system. You can say, oh, how can it be? You can point to the problem, but that's the fact. That's what happens in many countries around the world. The UK is maybe the extreme. They didn't want it because it gives too much power to elected officials. Some would say, again, not myself, law professor, left-wing law professor from the Tel Aviv University, Manny Maltner, said that this was part of a system that started in the 70s, late 70s and the 80s, not just because they got tired of the 60s, but because the 70s, the end of the 70s, the Begin went into power, the Likud went into power, so they want to keep the power to themselves, so they shifted all the power to the judiciary, to the unelected officials. I have a lot of examples of that. I don't want to take all the time for that, but that is the theory of law professor. In the Tel Aviv University, he is not one. He did not build a new settlement in Judea and Samaria in the past few years. He's extreme left wing. He's from Tel Aviv University, but you understand that this was a shift of power to the unelected officials. It started in the 70s. How it was made? First, they added to themselves the power to check the reasonability of decisions made by government or by elected officials. Meaning, even if a decision is according to the law, even if a decision to appoint someone, they can do and cancel any decision by the executive branch. The court takes and say, oh, I don't like the outcome. No, it cannot show any law that was broken. It cannot show any rule or they dotted all the I's and everything was perfect. But the outcome, the court says, we don't like the outcome, so we're canceling it. It got to a situation that, just imagine a situation that a new president will be elected, or the same president will be elected on November this year. He says, I want to appoint a new Secretary of State, a new state secretary. And someone who is not connected to the issue whatsoever, I will come to the US and I will appeal, and I say, oh, you want this person to be a Secretary of State? It's not reasonable. It's not reasonable. He's not a good guy. I don't like him. And the court will hear the case. In the US, I think, even with the problems you have with your judiciary, they won't get to that. The court will hear the case and will dismiss the Secretary of State because he doesn't like him. Not because he's not qualified, not because he's breaking any law, not because he's not a citizen or something, just because he doesn't like the person. Say he was bad-mouthing someone. he said something not nice. Now, I'm not making it up. The court in Israel had a hearing on a chief of staff in the army. And he said, oh, you want to appoint a chief of staff? He once said, he was asked if what does he feel when he is dropping a bomb in Gaza? And he said, what I feel when I drop a bomb is a slight bump in the plane. That's what I feel. Now, that was not sensitive enough, so the court had a hearing and said, you cannot be a chief of staff until you apologize. Now, you can agree, you can disagree, I don't care. I don't know any other country in the world that the court will say, what this guy said is not nice, not breaking any law, he cannot be a chief of staff. It's unbelievable. But that's what happened in Israel. Now, that was reasonability. After that, they decided in the 90s, out of nothing, out of thin air, that the basic law that the Knesset passed gave them the power to cancel Knesset laws. The laws did not say that. The laws did not mean that. No one knew that's what they're doing. They basically announced to Israel in 95, oh, you remember 92, you passed a basic law? That was a constitution. Like, I will announce now to all the people present in this Zoom conversation, oh, you remember when you got into the Zoom conversation, you said, I agree? Oh, you just sold me your house for $1. Just leave. That's the equivalent. And that's what the court in Israel did. Now, you can talk a lot, why did the elected officials in Israel did not stood up on the spot and fought it? I don't have any excuse for some of them. And it's to talk about it will be a different question altogether. It will be a day. You can talk about it for weeks. Why did the elected officials stood and decide and did not do anything? But the fact is that all those things are happening now. Judge Posner from the U.S. and Judge Bork from the U.S. They both addressed it. They read what's happening in Israel, and they said that what Barak did is a judicial buccaneering. He is a pirate. He took to himself powers that was never given to him, and he decided that the court can have any decision. Now, for many years, that is part of the reason why the elected officials did not rebel against it. Is for many years, it stayed in the declaration level. The court said, oh, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. But he never actually did it. He said, I can cancel Knesset laws. He said it in 95. But he never, the first time he actually canceled the Knesset law based on this law, that it was somehow controversial, was 99. So we waited 4 years, and 4 years in Israel, we know what happened in 4 years. It's a different government, it's different people. Now, we waited 4 years between the announcement and actually doing the thing. Now, and then when he actually did the thing that he said that he's gonna do, and people say, hey, what you're doing? Then the court said, what are you complaining about? I already said it 4 years ago. You were quiet for 4 years. Now, that's what happened in all the buccaneering that Barak did. That was his method. He would make a declaration that has zero effect. The public will not notice it. The elected officials will not notice it. But when he will use it, he would say, oh, I already said it 10 years ago. Wow. Didn't you get the memo? Now, that's the way it worked. Now, you can say, if you want to be 100% cynical, but I will be, why not? You know that what was the day in the US, you had 9/11, right? It was terrible. It was really a shock to everyone. In Israel, we are doing the dates. We're doing it the different way. We never. 9/11 is September 11. It's the 9 months, but 11 day. In Israel, we do it the other way around. If you tell to an Israeli 9/11, he's thinking it's the 9th of November, because we are switching the day and the. So in Israel, I'm not trying to compare anything, but in Israel we have 9/11, and 9/11 is a very important date. It's November 9th, 95, and that was the date when the court decided that he can cancel Knesset laws. It was a big decision. It was 600 pages. It's called Bank Mizrahi case. But he didn't get any notice. You know why? You know what happened in 9/11 in Israel in 1995? It was 4 days after Yitzhak Rabin was murdered. So this major decision, which now we say, oh, it was the Constitution of Israel, did not even get page 19 in the newspapers, because everyone was busy with Rabin's murder and Rabin's funeral and the new government, and no one even noticed that the court just decided, oh, I can cancel Knesset laws. You would say it's cynical, but I can believe that it didn't happen by mistake. No, I'm not blaming them for murdering Rabin if someone gets the wrong idea, but I'm really blaming them for using the time of the shock that Israel was to pass this kind of rulings under the radar. Why do I blame them that? Because that is what they have been doing all along. The decision, if we go, I'm going now from 95 to 2020 to now, to the present. The decision about the settlement regularization law, the law that was meant to prevent this wasteful and vengeful and just plain stupid demolishing of communities in Judea and Samaria, just because someone made a mistake in the papers. Give the people that the land is allegedly theirs. If they prove that the land is theirs, and most of the times there is no proof like that, let them get the money, let them get 150% of the money they need to get, whatever. But you're not demolishing a community because someone made a mistake in the papers 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. It doesn't make any sense. No one gets anything from it unless you like to see communities of Jews being demolished in Judea and Samaria. No one gets anything. I dare you to go to Amona, to Netiv Avot, see if anyone using the land now. It just ruins. Nothing is there. So what's the point? That was the law of the Knesset. The law passed in 2017, more than 3 years ago. The court hearing and the court case they took their time. It was the debate, the written papers were long, and every issue you can imagine, we discussed there. I want to say clearly, I represented the regional council of Binyamin in this case, not as part of Meshilut, just as my own private law firm. And everything was said. And the hearing took place in 2018, beginning of 2018. And it took more than 2 years, almost 3 years, to get the decision out. And they got the decision out the second they understood that there is a government that cannot retaliate. Nothing new happened in the case, 2.5 years, they took the decision out. They did not make the decision immediately because they knew that if they would cancel the law immediately, the government, the Knesset will retaliate. So they're using the time that they have, they're using the political timing in order to get a controversial ruling out. That's what they do. They don't want to get so that's how they win. That's how they have all the time in the world. They're self-perpetuating. They can appoint their friends. They can make the court go over and over and over again and do the same. And all these time, they are, and the Knesset is not stable. Now, they are making the Knesset unstable. The fact that not a lot of people remember, but we went to the first election out of 3 that we had last year. We went to the election because the draft law, the ultra-Orthodox draft law, was canceled by the court. It was the 3rd time in a row that the court canceled the ultra-Orthodox draft law, that the Knesset, the elected officials of Israel, decided a compromise, a good or bad compromise, but a compromise. No one is happy with the compromise, but decided on a compromise how to make the ultra-Orthodox communities in Israel take bigger part in the army and in the Israeli economy, and it was supposed to work well. The court says, no, not good enough for me. I want to cancel it. And after the court canceled it, the Knesset could not get to a new agreement, and they went to election. So the Knesset, we lost the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli 20th Knesset. We lost it a year ahead of time because of the court rulings that he canceled, and they couldn't get a new compromise after they already got to 3 different compromises that the court canceled all of them. So the court is creating instability in the Knesset, in the elected officials. He's canceling Knesset laws with illegal infiltrators issue. He's canceling decisions in security issues, and the elected officials are just too weak to retaliate. It's a big problem. We're working at it. We are in Meshilut. We're trying to give power to the elected officials to explain it, to explain the issue, to give them support, to help them prepare legislation offers. We're doing all kinds of things. Another huge I would say
Issue?
the major help that the court gets is from the state within the state. It's called the Justice Department, namely the chief legal advisor, the Attorney General in Israel. Unlike in the U.S., or most states in the U.S., and even, of course, the federal level, the Attorney General is appointed by the president in the federal level. Some states elect him directly. They elect their Attorney General, and it's basically everyone understands that the prosecution needs to be checked and needs to be looked and overlooked by elected officials, by the public, by democracy. In Israel, the legal advisor is being appointed by the government, but the appointment procedure, the government has, I would say, about 50% of the votes. But after you appoint him, you basically cannot touch him. You basically cannot touch him, even if he's going like what's happening this week, even if he's going crazy, even if he says that what happened today. I don't know how up to date with the news you are, but he announced now that he's considering to kick Netanyahu out of office because there was some revelations in the news about the Attorney General office. And he says, oh, he's using his position as a prime minister to his own benefit to hurt the prosecution in Israel. It makes him unfit to be a prime minister, and I will announce it. Now, in what world can you imagine an unelected official saying to the elected government, to elected prime minister, oh, I'm kicking you out of office because you said something that I don't like? But people talk about it now in Israel as if it's a valid option. Now, this position is, of course, was built by the courts. I said that Barak, before he was in the court, he was an attorney general, he was the chief legal advisor, but while sitting in the court, he gave this position enormous amount of power. In Israel, it's the same guy, again, unelected official, that has the power. He's the head of the prosecution by himself, is the chief legal advisor, is advised to the government and to the ministries, is considered by the court binding. If you don't listen to the legal advisor, the court will make you listen to him, but you cannot get second opinion on the legal advisories that you get. You cannot fire him, and if you go to court, he can prevent you from hiring another lawyer to represent your position. Now, this amount of power will make any sane person crazy. You cannot have this kind of power to one person. But the reason the court created this position, because while giving power to this position, he's taking away power from the elected officials. And he can prevent them from punitive measures that the elected officials will try to do to the court after he took all the power from them. So this unique position that no other country in the world has, Supreme Court like Israel, that you can go to him without any demand for standing. You don't need to show that you have an interest or a legal interest. You can come and say, I don't like this thing, I don't like this law, I don't like this person, I don't like this prime minister. The court will hear you. There is no appeal. He can decide on whatever issue wants, and he's self-perpetuating. He's not being elected by elected official. We have a unique Supreme Court, and we have a unique, not other country in the world who have this position like chief legal advisor. And when you try to change it, people say, oh, you're trying to change it because you are corrupt. But the thing is that in Israel, people say, oh, Netanyahu is corrupt, right? Everyone knows Netanyahu is corrupt, right? We have those allegations. But in the last 25 years, there was not a single prime minister who was not under investigation. Now, if everyone in Israel is corrupt, I believe that no one is corrupt. But you can say, but some bigger and more important people in the law field in Israel said that those allegations, those cases against prime minister and against justice ministers are a way to control them. It's not really a thing. It's not really that they are corrupt. Now, a person that said that is Professor Daniel Friedman from Tel Aviv University, who was a minister during Olmert government. Another person who said that is Professor Yakov Cohen, the late Zichrono Livracha, who was also a justice minister, and he wrote in his book, it's not an interview, it's not something that was, oh, he didn't really say it nice. No, he wrote it in his book that he's finding it hard to believe that in Israel people do not understand that the Praklitud is making the prosecution is creating cases against elected officials out of thin cloth, just because they want to control them. So that was a justice minister who was also a law professor, who is the head of the largest law firm in Israel at the time. It's not some, we're not talking about some, conspiracy theorist that said it. Now, of course, Amir Ohana, the last justice minister from the Likud, he supports this understanding that the prosecution is corrupt and is creating cases against politicians just because they are afraid that they will take away power from them. And you know what? The president, Ruby Rivlin, when in 2003, he called it the rule of law gang that makes up cases against people that are not going according to the Bagatz party line. He said it not while he was some nobody. He was the Speaker of the House, Speaker of the Knesset at the time. He is now the President of Israel. I don't know if he will say the same thing today, but he said it very clearly. So for many years, the change was not, you couldn't bring change from the political system because the politicians were afraid. They were afraid that they will have a criminal case brought up against them with no reason. They won't have any way to defend themselves. The media is we know the problems of the media in Israel. You don't need me to explain. It's the problem in the media in the US, it's the problem in the media in Israel, it's all around the world. I think Danny can speak about the problem in the media much better than me. I think that what saves us today is the fact that we have social media, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, and people can call out lies just with Zoom meetings, with YouTube videos, with Facebook or with Twitter, and you cannot make up things, and the public will sit quietly and say, oh, if there are cases against him, and all the media says, oh, probably is corrupt. So now we have the power as a public. I think we can use it.
You know, Simcha, it was very interesting. I tried to boost on Facebook the notice of this meeting, and it was rejected by Facebook against policy. I'm not really sure exactly why. I guess any promotion of Judea and Samaria or sovereignty in Judea and Samaria is against Facebook policy. So maybe we don't really.
It's incitement.
It's incitement. It's so, you know, we wish we had the media, social media. We don't have the mainstream media. We don't have the social media, really. There are lots of arguments with Twitter. Dan, I'm sure you know about that. But I just want to bring you back for a second, because I think we've had a couple of questions come up in the chat box. And I know that the Israelis who are on this call really understand this, but there are some Americans on the call who don't. And we've had questions like, how are judges appointed?
Okay. So judges are appointed in Israel in a committee. It's a committee of 9. Now, you have to remember when you talk about the system of judges' appointment in Israel, I said we have a very unique system. I didn't give you all the details, but in other countries it has some kind of a similar system is India. You might understand the connection because Israel and India has a shared faith, fate.
History.
History. That also the US have, but a few hundred years before, were ex-colonies of Britain. So the British mandate in Israel and the British rulings of India, they did not want the power to be available for the natives. So to build the justice system in order to prevent the natives from having too much power. So in a sense, the natives of Israel are still lacking the power. Now, India and Israel has similar systems of judges' appointment. In Israel, the system is committee of 9. From the 9, we have 2 Knesset members. Usually it's one from the opposition, one from the coalition, but it's not always the case. Now we have 2 members of the coalition for an example, but 2 members of the Knesset and 2 ministers. That's 4 out of the 9. I can tell you that the rest are not elected officials. So you can immediately understand that when you have a committee of 9 and you have only 4 people representing the public from the Knesset on the government and the executive, then it's not a democratic way of appointment, because the people of Israel are represented by a minority. The majority of Israel is represented by a minority in a committee of 9. Now, the rest 5 seats are 3 sitting Supreme Court judges, that there are 3, and 2 members of the bar. So the legal profession has the ability to appoint someone to be a judge, even if all the members that are representing the public are objecting. They have a majority. They have 5 out of 9. Now, to make things even more complex, is when you want to appoint someone to the Supreme Court, you need to have a 7 out of 9, meaning that the current judges of the court, the justices, have a veto power, and you cannot appoint someone if the current members of the court are not in his favor. So they have a veto. And crazy as it seems, it's better than the situation that was before, because that was a change in 2008 in the law to give this veto. Because the same way the justices have veto, also the public has a veto, because you need to have 7 out of 9. Before that change, you could appoint someone to the Supreme Court, even if everyone from the public would say he's a bad judge. Even if all Knesset members, coalition and opposition, and the government and the prime minister would say, we don't want this guy, he's a bad guy, he would be appointed to the Supreme Court. So now we have a veto, but it's a mutual veto. Of course, Meshilut has an offer to change this system. You know what? I will say crazy system. You know why I will say crazy system? Because in India, when they try to change the system, the court, the Supreme Court of India decided that this change is unconstitutional. It was a change in the constitution, but they said, oh, you cannot change the constitution. Why? Because we said so. Now, you can say that is crazy, but what create this position of the Supreme Court of India brought India to a situation, and again, I kid you not, I dare you to find me wrong, the judges in India, some of them appointed by the old system, don't recognize the judges that are appointed by the new system, because they say it's unconstitutional, and they are giving orders to hospitalize into institute in the mental institute each other. So you have a court order to put another judge in a mental institution, and the other one says, oh, he's crazy, he's putting me in a mental institution, I will put him in a mental institution. And that's what this crazy system brought to India. So you need to change the system before it gets really crazy, or it already happened.
Do you see a way forward for the Knesset to disallow the court to wield this kind of power? I mean, the court really, in a democracy, should only have the power that the people allow it to have.
Okay, you talked about democracy. I don't understand the world. I'm from Israel. It's not a democracy. That's the problem. In a democracy, the court should only have the power that the public gives them. But the judges in Israel, we have a court hearing set to, so the judges will say, if they allow the Knesset to enact the Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, basic law. But if you say basic law is like a constitution, that's what they always say. Now, a court, and after the basic law, Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people was enacted by the Knesset, the court got appeals, I think more than 20 appeals from different organizations, mostly, of course, extreme left and anti-Israel organizations, that went to the Supreme Court and said, oh, you cannot enact this law, it's a racist law. because Israel cannot be the nation state of the Jewish people. It's racist. You cannot say it because you did not give equality to the Arabs, because it's not the nation state of the Arabs, right? So they went to the Supreme Court, and instead of kicking them out, this kind of appeal, I would say that this kind of appeal in a normal court will not, that you don't need a judge to kick this kind of appeal. The secretary is more than enough. The cleaner can do it. What do you need a judge the judge will say, I'm sorry, I'm not even trying to argue if you are right or you are wrong. It's not up to me to decide what Israel constitution is gonna say. If I don't like the constitution of Israel, then I won't be a judge in Israel. I will leave Israel, I will quit my job, and I'll go to Berlin. I cannot, as a judge, I cannot be the decider on what the law is. Now, instead of doing so, the court set a hearing with 11 judges that will sit and decide if Israel can or cannot be the nation state of the Jewish people. I don't know what to do with this information. I hope you know. But what can you? The things that you can do is to tell the court, it's not your territory. Get out. We had a start of this kind of idea or movement by the Speaker of the House, Yuli Edelstein. I don't know if you remember, but the court decided that he has to make an election for a new Speaker of the House. Now, the law and the basic law and the rules of procedures in the Knesset were very clear that he has time, but the court said, no, I want you to make the vote now. I want to manage the Knesset by myself. That's what the court told him. So he said, sorry, no, you're not going to tell me how to run the Knesset. Because of the political reason, he had to resign. He didn't stay in office and said so. He said no and then quit. Instead of the judges quitting, we had Yuli Edelstein quit. But of course, he prevented what the court wanted to do. The court wanted to have a vote before you have a government, and then it would be very hard to start a new government. So he got the times it needed to make the negotiation, and we had this government. I don't know if it's such a great success if you see how the government behaves, but that's a different question. But
he did outmaneuver them. He did outmaneuver them for that. Can I just ask you one thing? We're running sort of a little bit towards the end of our session. The override clause. What can I guess the override clause? The words speak for themselves to anybody who speaks English. But what do you see as the possibilities for success?
So again, if we'll have a different Knesset, a different political arena, we'll have an override clause. Now, what does the override clause do? There are many kinds of override clause. Many people use the same term for many kinds of override clause. I think it's a good discussion for law professors. I want to keep it simple. An override clause that is fit to the needs of the state of Israel says two things. One, it puts a heavy limit on the court when the court wants to cancel laws. That's one part of the override clause. My suggestion, mine and Meshilut's suggestion is that only if all the judges in the court will decide that the law has to be canceled, the law can be canceled. It's not a decision of 3 judges or 5 judges or 7 judges, only 100% of the court, 15 judges saying that a law is unconstitutional, they can cancel the law. And even then, the other part of the override clause saying, okay, you canceled the law because you don't agree with us, we can reenact the law in a majority of 61, and it will be in place even though the court does not like it. We, the people, decided that this law is good. Now, if you have 15 judges if you need 15 judges to cancel, and you need 61 to reenact the law, this kind of a power balance will make sure that only a law that is really, really bad will be canceled. And if the Knesset will decide otherwise, they can overdo it. Of course, you can talk about different numbers. You can say if 15 judges, then it's so rare, then you can have 70 Knesset members to support it, 80. You can. It's a numbers game. You can say the other way around. I don't need 15 judges. Even if 10 out of the 15 is canceling the law, it's okay. You say, okay, then, but then a regular majority, you don't need 61. You can have this kind of give and take. But the main reason, the main idea should be that the final word should always be to the public or the public representatives. You cannot give the final word on legislation or policy to people that are unaccountable to the public. They were not elected by the public cannot kick them out of office. Then you're not a democracy if you don't take the control. Even in the US, when you have a constitution and the court makes a very bad mistake, you have an option to change the constitution. It's not a regular majority, I know, but you can change the constitution, and the court cannot do anything when you change the constitution, because the final word in a democracy is always belongs to the public.
Well, I think that's a pretty good note to end on, because we're always so proud that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and I thank you, Simcha and Dan, for working so hard with other people to try to preserve and to protect that democracy. It's so important. It's something we're so proud of. It's something as Jews that we really can hang our hat on and say that, we even in the midst of all this craziness that's going on in the Middle East, and we haven't even gotten into half of the craziness, but that we stand for democracy. We stand for people having a say in the laws that govern their nation. And is there anybody else who would like to unmute and ask a question? So I will just say, thank you so much, everybody.
We have enabled everyone to unmute themselves, and I see Yakov Cohen has a question.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yakov Cohen, you want to unmute?
Unmute. Okay, here we go. Okay. My question is like this. Why can't, being that the Israeli law is trying to, is corrupt and it's broken, why can't there be a referendum or some sort of to reappoint judges and rewrite the constitution and have halachic law for Jewish people, and non-Jewish people fall under the category of no-hide laws? I mean, that would be the ideal situation. So the basic fundamental principles that a person that governs daily life would be protected. There'll be the no-hide laws will not discriminate in terms of Muslim, Christian, and so on. But because under the no-hide laws, Christians and Muslims are okay. And so why wouldn't they look at something more that could actually benefit and has a precedent? Because fundamentally, English law, common law, American law, everything is based from the Torah. So why wouldn't they look at implementing something of that obviously before Mashiach, but that would be the easiest way to solve what's going on.
The answer to that is what I believe, that a decision of the public in Israel should be respected. If the public in Israel will decide on your idea, it's up to them. I have to say, as Meshilut, as the organization, we never ever try to say what is the right policy in Israel. We have our strong views. I don't think that anyone that would ever, and I encourage you when you come when all this coronavirus craziness will end, I encourage you to come and visit my house in Pnei Kedem, in one of the most remote settlements in Judea and Samaria. I don't think that anyone that will come will have a doubt what are my views on the land of Israel and what on halacha or whatever. But I think my role as a lawyer working for Meshilut, and as a lawyer and as a Jew in Israel, is to give the ability to the Jewish people to determine their own government, their own laws, their own reasoning. I surely hope that they will make the right decisions, but before they are making the right decisions, my work is to get them the ability to decide for themselves. I hope and I pray that the decision will be right.
Simcha, Dan, everybody, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for informing us about this very, very important topic. And thank you everybody for joining us to hear all about this. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thanks again.
Thank you, Judy.
Oh, Frederica,
Yeah.
I heard your
I
voice.
said, yes, I
Thank you.
said, thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Frederica, and thank you.